The rain on Jericho 9 wasn't water. It was ash falling from the black sky, glowing faintly in the reflection of orbital fire. Commander Rylan Voss knelt in the mud, gripping the hilt of his sword as if it were the last tether to life. Across the blasted plain stood his opponent, a towering Khazor warlord, its armor a jagged sculpture of bone and steel, eyes burning like volcanic glass. The alien horde behind it roared, the sound shaking the shattered remains of the city. Rylan's armor was dented and scorched, but his stance was unbroken. He could feel every heartbeat like a drum of war in his chest. This wasn't a duel for honor. It was the last spark standing between humanity and extinction. He raised the blade, and the crowd of monsters fell silent. The first clash was a storm. The Khazor struck with a warhammer that could level a wall, the blow exploding mud into the air. Rylan slid aside by inches, countering with a slash that carved a thin line of molten steel across the alien's breastplate. The warlord snarled, swinging again, this time with a speed that defied its size. Sparks lit the air each time their weapons collided, painting the scene in orange bursts against the black rain. Rylan's muscles screamed from the force of the impacts, but his eyes never wavered. He had learned long ago that a human didn't win through raw power. They won by refusing to break. Every move was calculated, every dodge a step toward the killing blow. The alien's confidence began to crack. The horde's chants became restless, a low rumble of unease rolling through their ranks. The Khazor warlord pressed harder, desperate to crush the Earthborn Champion quickly, but Rylan adapted with uncanny precision. He shifted the tempo, luring the alien into overreaching, then punishing it with brutal counterstrikes. Mud splashed and steam hissed from their armor as the fight slowed into a deadly rhythm. Rylan's breathing steadied, his sword movements sharper, cleaner. The warlord lunged, committing to a massive overhead swing, and in that heartbeat, Rylan saw the opening. His blade flashed in an arc of silver and blood. The alien staggered, its weapon falling to the mud, and for the first time, it looked afraid. The warlord's knees buckled, its massive form crashing into the ash-soaked ground. With a thunderous impact, the horde fell into stunned silence, thousands of glowing eyes fixed on the lone human still standing. Rylan planted his boot on the alien's chest and raised his sword high, letting the rain wash the blood from its edge. "This is Earth," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "And we don't kneel." Somewhere in the distance, a cheer broke the silence, faint at first, then growing into a roar. The other Khazor didn't charge. They just watched, uncertain for the first time in centuries. Rylan stepped back, leaving the warlord's body in the mud, and turned toward the horizon. This wasn't over. It had only begun. That night, the ashes fell thicker, but the air carried something new. Whispers of the Earthborn Champion's defiance. In the underground shelters, wounded soldiers and frightened civilians repeated his words. Among the alien ranks, the story spread like a virus. A human had bested one of the Khazor's strongest. Rylan knew it was dangerous. The Khazor would not let this insult go unanswered, but he also knew the truth. Fear had cracked their armor. He sat by the dying embers of a fire, sharpening his blade, his mind already on the battles to come. Somewhere above, in the vast black of space, the Khazor High Command was watching. He hoped they were. He wanted them to. Dawn broke in blood red, light as the Khazor returned, this time not with one warlord, but with a champion cadre, the Vorthok Blades. 4 assassins, each trained in a different art of killing, stepped into the ruins with weapons drawn. They moved like shadows, circling Rylan, their cloaks flowing in the wind. Civilians watching from the wrecked rooftops held their breath. Rylan's fingers tightened on his sword. 4 against 1 wasn't a fight, it was an execution. But, as the assassins closed in, his stance shifted, weight balanced. eyes scanning for weaknesses. The Vorthak thought they were hunters. They didn't realize they had cornered a wolf. The first assassin struck without warning, a blur of black. Steel aimed at Ryland's throat. His blade met it with a metallic scream, sparks spraying across the ground. The second attacked from behind, forcing Ryland into a rolling dive that brought him up between them. He struck low, severing the second's leg with a single brutal swing. The alien howled, collapsing in the mud, its blood steaming on contact with the rain. The other two came at once, their movements perfectly in sync. Ryland's sword became a shield and a spear, deflecting strikes while driving the point toward exposed joints. Each block was a heartbeat closer to the kill. The third assassin overextended, its twin daggers flashing wide, and Ryland punished it with a deep cut across the ribs. The fourth tried to take advantage, lunging with a spear tipped in some burning toxin, but Ryland spun inside its reach, shoving the alien into its wounded comrade. In a single fluid motion, he drove his sword clean through both, pinning them together before wrenching it free. The survivors staggered back, realization dawning in their alien eyes. Ryland advanced, mud sucking at his boots, his face set in, grim determination. "Tell your masters," he growled. "Earth fights back." The last assassin didn't hesitate. It fled into the rain. The bodies were dragged away under the watchful eyes of the crowd. The Khazor weren't celebrating now. They were calculating, their hive minds already adjusting strategies for a human they could no longer underestimate. Ryland sheathed his sword and turned away from the battlefield, ignoring the stares that followed him. Every step was deliberate, every breath steady. He had blood on his armor and ash in his lungs, but his resolve burned hotter than ever. Somewhere deep in Khazor territory, the High Command was deciding whether to destroy him outright or turn him into an example. He smiled to himself. Either way, he'd make them bleed for the attempt. That night, the resistance found him. A young woman named Lyra, barely 20, emerged from the shadows of the ruins with a handful of armed fighters. "We've been looking for you," she said. "The people are ready to rise. They just need a spark." Ryland looked at her, then at the ragtag group behind her, humans in scavenged armor, eyes hard with survival. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he drew his sword and planted it into the ground between them. "If you're ready to fight," he said, "then follow me. I'll show you how to make the Khazor afraid of the dark." And in that moment, the resistance began to move. The ruins of Jericho 9 became the resistance's training ground. Ryland drilled them in silence at dawn, forcing every recruit to master blade, rifle, and bare-handed combat. He taught them the bold human tricks the Khazor had never seen. Feints, misdirection, fighting dirty when it mattered most. Lyra proved quick with a rifle, hitting targets even in the ash-thick rain. By nightfall, they struck their first supply convoy, hitting it fast and vanishing into the blackened streets. The Khazor response was sluggish, their arrogance slowing them. When the smoke cleared, the resistance had food, ammo, and their first taste of victory. Ryland didn't celebrate. He knew the retaliation would come fast and hard. Days later, the Khazor deployed scouts to hunt them, sleek machines with scanners that could pierce walls. Ryland turned their advantage into a trap. He lured the drones into the old power grid, where Lyra overloaded the remaining generators. The explosion lit the sky for miles, taking the scouts with it. The resistance cheered. In the shadows, their voices carrying a dangerous hope. Ryland only nodded. "Hope's a blade," he told them, "and if we don't keep it sharp, it'll cut us instead." His mind was already on the next move, targeting the Khazor communications hub. Cutting their ability to coordinate would turn the invaders' strength into chaos. The hub was a towering spire of alien metal, its surface rippling like liquid steel under the night's crimson moon. Getting close was suicide, so they didn't. Rylan and Lyra climbed to the rooftops overlooking the spire's central array, using stolen alien rifles to snipe its emitters. Each blast sent a tremor through the structure, static flooding the air. Within minutes, Khazor channels were scrambled, their orders lost in a storm of noise. The resistance slipped away before reinforcements arrived, the spire still burning in the distance. Across the occupied zones, alien units moved without coordination, clashing with one another in the confusion. Rylan watched from the hills, his eyes cold. "Now," he said, "we make them bleed." The counterattack was inevitable. The Khazor sent war bands through the ruins, burning block after block to flush the humans out. Rylan's fighters struck from the shadows, vanishing into sewers and rubble after each kill. Explosives set in collapsing tunnels crushed alien patrols, while sniper fire picked off officers from impossible distances. Each loss forced the Khazor to spread thinner, weakening their control. Yet Rylan could feel the weight pressing down. Every fight carried the risk of losing the people he had sworn to protect. He began keeping his distance from the younger fighters, not out of coldness, but because he couldn't bear to see their eyes if they didn't make it home. To when the Khazor finally adapted, they sent something worse than soldiers: hunters. The hunters were silent killers, cloaked in bending light, moving through the ruins like ghosts. The first night they came, 3 resistance fighters vanished, without a sound. Rylan gathered the survivors and laid out the only plan that could work: fight them in the open, where their stealth was weakest. The battle was brutal, the hunters' claws cutting through armor like paper, but Rylan's traps. And relentless attacks turned the tide. One by one the hunters fell, their cloaks flickering as they died. The victory was costly, but it proved something vital. The Khazor could send their deadliest killers, and humanity would still stand. In the aftermath, the resistance had grown, from a ragged handful to nearly 100 fighters. Word spread across occupied worlds. The Earthborn Champion was alive and leading the fight. Refugees arrived daily, bringing weapons, intel, and the will to resist. Rylan began organizing cells, each capable of striking independently, forcing the Khazor to fight 100 wars at once. Lyra took command of a sniper unit, striking targets miles away before melting into the wasteland. Every mission carried the same message carved into walls and broadcast over stolen channels: "We are human. We endure." The Khazor High Command began calling Rylan not just a nuisance, but a threat to the stability of their war front. The turning point came when a captured Khazor officer revealed a plan to obliterate Jericho 9 entirely. The aliens had assembled an orbital strike fleet, intending to burn the planet to ash rather than lose control. The Resistance's only hope was to destroy the fleet before it could fire. Rylan's strategy was audacious: infiltrate the enemy's launch site, seize one of their warships, and turn its weapons on the rest. It was suicide on paper, but to Rylan it was the only option. "We don't have to win the war today," he told them. "We just have to live long enough to fight tomorrow." Under the cover of an electrical storm, the Resistance moved. Lightning lit their approach in stark flashes, illuminating the alien. Sentries they cut down in silence. The launch site was a cathedral of alien engineering, spires and hangars stretching into the sky, alive with blue energy. Rylan led the assault, his sword cutting through alien steel as easily as flesh. They reached the warship's boarding ramp under a hail of plasma fire, the storm above drowning the world in sound and fury. Lyra covered their entry, her shots dropping enemy after enemy. Inside, the corridors pulsed with alien light, the air thick with heat and the smell of scorched metal. Taking the ship was chaos. Resistance fighters clashed with Khazor crew in tight quarters, blades and rifles sparking in the confined space. Rylan carved a path to the bridge, his strikes fast and decisive, every movement honed by months of survival. The ship's captain, was a hulking brute with 4 arms, but Rylan drove his blade into its chest before it could raise its weapon. Lyra slid into the helm, her hands flying across the alien controls. "I can fly it," she said, "but we've got company." On the view screens, other warships were moving to intercept, their weapons charging. Rylan smiled grimly. "Then we give them something to remember." The warship's cannons roared, tearing into the fleet with blinding bursts of energy. One by one, the Khazor vessels erupted into fireballs, their debris raining through the storm. Resistance fighters cheered over the comms as the launch site itself went up in flames, fuel reserves detonating in chain reactions. The orbital strike was over before it began, the fleet reduced to wreckage. But the stolen ship was badly damaged, systems failing as enemy reinforcements closed in. Rylan looked at Lyra. "We've got one last shot before this bird dies. Let's make it count." She nodded, setting a course not for escape, but straight into the heart of the enemy's command carrier. The stolen warship's hull screamed, under enemy fire, but Rylan kept moving through its corridors toward the boarding tubes. The Khazor carrier loomed ahead, a black leviathan bristling with weapons, its surface crawling with defensive turrets. Lyra flew straight into the firestorm, rolling and diving through impossible gaps. Alarms blared in a dozen alien tongues, and the deck shuddered with every near miss. At the last moment, Rylan sealed his armor and braced as Lyra rammed the ship's bow directly into the carrier's hangar. The impact hurled fighters aside like toys, scattering wreckage across the deck. Rylan was already on his feet, sword drawn, as the hangar doors sealed behind them. There was no way out now, only forward. The hangar erupted into chaos. Khazor soldiers swarmed from every entrance, their armor glowing with battle symbols. Rylan cut through them with brutal efficiency, his blade finding gaps in their plating, his movements an unbroken rhythm of survival. Resistance fighters poured out behind him, laying down withering fire. Lyra shouted over the din, pointing to a sealed bulkhead. "That's the path to the command deck!" Explosives roared, tearing the doors from their hinges. Smoke and plasma fire filled the air as the humans surged forward, their war cries echoing in the alien vessel's metallic throat. Every step forward came at a cost, bodies left behind in pools of alien and human blood. As they pressed deeper, the corridors grew stranger, lined with living conduits that pulsed like veins. The carrier was part machine, part creature, its systems, alive in ways no human tech had ever been. The walls vibrated with an alien heartbeat, as if the ship itself sensed their intrusion. Rylan ignored it, driving the vanguard onward. But the Khazor had saved their elite for this moment, towering warriors with curved blades that shimmered like liquid light. The clash was furious, each blow rattling teeth, each parry a hair from death. Rylan's armor was cut in a dozen places before he managed to bring one of the Titans down, its death cry echoing like a temple bell. They reached the inner sanctum at last, a massive chamber dominated by a throne of shifting metal upon which sat the Khazor Supreme Warlord. Its presence was suffocating, eyes like burning stars fixed on Rylan. Around the throne stood 6 bodyguards, their weapons raised. "You are the anomaly," the warlord said in a voice like grinding stone. "The one who teaches prey to bite the hunter." Rylan's answer was a wordless charge. The room became a whirlwind of steel and plasma, bodies colliding, the clash of wills as deafening as the weapons. Lyra fought at his side, her rifle spitting fire until the barrel glowed red. One by one, the bodyguards fell, but the warlord never rose until the last of his protectors lay dead. The warlord moved like nothing Rylan had ever faced. Every strike was a storm, every counter a death sentence narrowly avoided. Their blades met again and again, sparks leaping like fireflies. The warlord's strength was overwhelming, But Ryland's speed and refusal to yield began to tilt the balance. At last, in a single desperate moment, Ryland fainted low and drove his sword upward through the warlord's chest. The alien staggered, its burning eyes dimming. "This changes nothing," it rasped. Ryland twisted the blade. "It changes everything." The warlord collapsed, and the alien heartbeat in the walls began to falter. Sirens wailed. The carrier was dying. "All units, evacuate!" Lyra shouted, but Ryland only smiled grimly. "No, we finish it." The humans and freed prisoners from the cells joined forces, cutting a path back to the hangar. But Ryland didn't follow. He had one more destination, the carrier's reactor. The corridors shook violently as the ship's systems failed. Plasma conduits rupturing in bursts of white-hot fire. Ryland fought his way through panicked Khazor crew, ignoring their pleas and curses. At the reactor chamber, the core pulsed like a dying star. He planted the last of their explosives along its containment rings, each one armed with a short fuse. As he set the final charge, he thought of Earth, of the people who had died believing they were alone. "Not anymore," he whispered, and turned to leave. Lyra caught him in the corridor. "We can still make it out," she said, grabbing his arm. He shook his head. "If this ship escapes, the war doesn't end." Her eyes flashed with understanding and pain. "Then I'm staying too." But Ryland pulled her toward the escape route. "You lead them now. They'll need someone who believes as much as fights." She hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding, tears cutting through the grime on her face. She sprinted for the shuttles while Ryland turned back toward the core. The countdown had already begun, the reactor's pulse growing erratic. Every step felt heavier than the last. The final minutes were chaos. The Khazor crew abandoned ship, their fighters tearing into space in blind panic. Resistance shuttles blasted away from the carrier, carrying survivors into the void. In the hangar, Lyra strapped in and watched the massive vessel shrink in the viewport. Her comm crackled with Ryland's voice. Tell them humans don't bow." The channel went silent. Then, with a blinding flash, the carrier erupted. The explosion tore through the fleet, igniting fuel reserves and sending shockwaves that lit the darkness for miles. The blast washed over the fleeing ships like sunrise breaking after the longest night. When the light faded, silence filled the comms. Then, one by one, voices began to speak. Human, alien, all survivors of the Khazor oppression. They spoke his name. They spoke the truth of what had happened. And in that moment, the legend of the Earthborn Champion was sealed. Across occupied space. Resistance cells rose up, fueled by the knowledge that the Khazor could bleed, and that one man had shown them how. Lyra sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. She would carry the fight forward. But in her heart she knew Ryland's war had already been won.